Hello and welcome to my channel of Passionate PT. In this channel, we're mostly going to make videos on the neuroanatomy and neurorehabilitation. So my today's video is about upper motor neuron and lower motor neuron injuries. I will strongly recommend you people to watch the previous videos of pyramidal tracts because after watching that video, this will be much more easier for you to understand. Let's get started. So upper motor and lower motor. So the name suggests that these are the description. This is the thing which is mostly related to the motor tracts. Motor tracts included in the descending tracts are pyramidal tracts, which includes two types of the tracts: corticospinal tracts and corticobulbar tracts. So what I'm going to explain here will be applicable to both the tracts, corticospinal and corticobulbar tracts. Here I've drawn the corticospinal tracts to explain it. So corticospinal tract, as you know, they start somewhere from the cortex and they end at the anterior horn cells, and from the anterior horn cells further there are the peripheral nerve that emerge out of the spinal cord. So first we need to understand that how we can differentiate between upper motor and lower motor neuron injuries. So what is included in the upper motor neuron? Any injury or any disorder that affects the structures above the anterior horn cells. These are the anterior horn cells, these all big dots. Any injury that affects the structure above the anterior horn cells will be included in the upper motor neuron disorder. Okay, so what lies above the anterior horn cell? Above the anterior horn cell, there will be the corticospinal tracts and brain and its structures. Okay. So any injury that lies above the anterior horn cells will be the issue related to the upper motor neuron. Okay. And now the lower motor neuron. Any injury or any trauma that affects anterior horn cells and the structures lying below it, that will be the peripheral nerves in most of the cases, will be the lower motor neuron disorder. Okay, now one thing you need to keep in mind that anterior horn cells are included in the lower motor neuron disorder, and upper motor neuron disorder only includes the injury above the anterior horn cells. Now let's take an example. For example, if the injury or trauma is at the level of C5, okay, the C5 level of spinal cord got injured or got cut by any wound or anything. Okay, so above the C5 everything will be fine because corticospinal tracts are supplying the anterior horn cells to the anterior horn cells above the C5. Below the C5 there will be the upper motor neuron disorder, and at the level of C5 there will be the lower motor neuron disorder. Okay, now let's talk about this in a bit detail. At the level, injury is at the level of C5. At the level of C5, the anterior horn cells will be injured. Anterior horn cells injury is included into the lower motor neuron disorder. So at the level of C5, there will be the lower motor neuron injury. When coming below the level of the C5, C6, C7, their injury is above the anterior horn cells. For example, their injury is to their corticospinal tracts, because the corticospinal tract for the lower level will first pass through the upper levels of the spinal cord. For example, corticospinal tract for the C6 will first pass through C4, C5, then they will reach C6. Okay, so when there will be injury of the C5, the corticospinal tract for the C6 will be cut or will be injured because they are passing through C5 and C5 is injured. So for the C6 the injury will be above their anterior horn cells, and for the C6 it will be upper motor neuron. But for the C5 the injury is to the anterior horn cells, and for them it will be the lower motor neuron disorder. Okay, so below C5 all the levels of spinal cord will show upper motor neuron disorder, and at the level of injury it will show lower motor neuron disorder, and above the level of injury everything will be good and fine. Okay, so let's talk about few of the signs which are given at many places about upper motor neuron and lower motor neuron disorder. I have written over here. You can see for the upper motor neuron the injury will be above anterior horn cell, as I have explained. For lower motor neuron it will include anterior horn cells and below. Upper motor neuron injured will show the spastic, and this will be flaccid. For upper motor neuron tone will be increased, and here obviously flaccidity, so tone will be decreased. There will be the deep tendon reflexes for upper motor neuron will be exaggerated. For lower motor neuron they will be suppressed, and superficial reflexes will be absent in both. For upper motor neuron the Babinski sign will be positive. So what is the Babinski sign? If you irritate the lateral border of the sole of the foot, there will be the fanning or extension of the toes of the foot. Okay, in normal scenario there will be the flexion, but if there is upper motor neuron disorder there will be the fanning and extension of the toes. The clone, there'll be presence of the clonus. What is clonus? If you suddenly dorsiflex the foot, or suddenly repeatedly dorsiflex the foot, the foot will start to dorsiflex and plantar flex in real quick fashion, and it'll repeatedly, or you may say it will start to shiver or tremble like thing. Okay, this is what is clonus. Okay, and in the lower motor neuron you will see fasciculations and fibrillations. Okay, I've also mentioned some example. For in upper motor neuron, cerebrovascular accident, stroke is included, or traumatic brain injury, because injury to the brain will be upper motor neuron because it lies above the anterior horn cells in the brain. And in the low motor neuron disorder, polio, polio is included in lower motor neuron disorder because polio the anterior horn cells are affected. Peripheral nerve injury, the peripheral nerves lie beyond the anterior horn cells, so it will included in the lower motor neuron disorder. Then the cranial nerve injury, cranial nerve, again I've again mentioned the corticobulbar tracts. The cranial nerve originate beyond the cranial nerve nuclei, so any injury to the cranial nerve will be lower motor neuron disorder, and injury to the corticobulbar tracts which lie above the cranial nerve nuclei will be upper motor neuron disorder, and injury to the cranial nerve nuclei will be lower motor neuron disorder. Similar description which I have given here for the corticospinal tract will apply to the corticobulbar tracts, or in the case of the cranial nerves. Hope you like the video. Thank you very much.